Right, so we've just navigated the intricate landscape of Parmenides' metaphysics and cosmology. Now, let's zoom in on one particularly fascinating figure, the goddess. Our first stop is Aetius, who gives us a pretty specific take on her. He basically says, hey, she's one of those mixed rings. This sounds like he's trying to translate or summarize what Parmenides actually wrote in Fragment 12, line 3. But here's a little twist. Aetius leaves out this interesting detail about the rings being narrower. Why might that be? Maybe it was less important for his summary, or maybe it got lost in translation. It's a small point, but it hints at how interpretations can subtly shift. So Aetius lays out his version of Parmenides' cosmos. First he talks about these rings, some made of rare stuff, light, some dense, dark, and then these mixed ones in between. That part seems pretty straightforward, echoing the start of Fragment 12. But remember that missing narrower bit? Still no sign of it here. Then, things get more solid. Aetius describes a whole wall-like enclosure around the rings, a fiery ring underneath that, a solid center, which we know is Earth, and another fiery ring around that center. Hold on, where did all this solid stuff come from in the original text? It's not there. The comparison to a city wall might be a Pythagorean touch, but Parmenides' heaven wasn't solid. And the center? Clearly Earth, the sphere Theophrastus credits Parmenides with discovering. Finally, Aetius brings in the goddess as the source of motion, calling her governing goddess, key carrying justice, necessity. This sounds like a mix of Fragment 12, line 3, plus maybe some nods to the prologue's justice and Fragment 9's necessity. It's a composite picture, blending direct quotes with interpretive additions. Now, Aetius isn't the only voice in the ancient chorus describing this goddess. Cicero, in his summary, paints a slightly different picture. For him, she's more like a ring of pure light, holding back the heat and encircling the heavens. Notice he doesn't call her a mixed ring, and his description feels more focused on her role as a boundary. Then there's Philodemus, who adds another layer. He says she's inanimate, unlike the gods she creates, who have human-like feelings and thoughts. This distinction between the divine source and its created offspring is quite significant. So, what does this tell us? It shows that the tradition wasn't monolithic. Different thinkers, or perhaps different sources, emphasized different aspects of Parmenides' goddess. Was she primarily a physical structure, a cosmic force, or something else entirely? These variations keep us guessing. Okay, let's tackle a puzzle. Simplicius, a later commentator, strongly disagreed with Alexander's idea that Parmenides saw fire as the ultimate origin. But wait, if the goddess is the source of motion and coming to be, how does that square with fire's role? Here's a thought. What if the goddess herself is essentially fire, or at least a primary manifestation of it? If that's the case, maybe we can reconcile her role with the importance of fire. This makes us wonder again about Cicero's simpler description versus Aetius' more complex, potentially problematic one. Could Cicero's version be closer to the mark? Interestingly, both Simplicius and Philoponus, another key figure, seem to have gotten their anti-peripatetic views from their teacher, Ammonius. And neither of them really digs into what the goddess is made of in terms of the fundamental elements, fire and night. It's a gap in the discussion. Let's dissect some key phrases in Fragment 12 itself. That word stenodere, narrower. Simplicius is vague about what it modifies, but the later tradition clarifies it refers to the rings. Given Parmenides uses Stephanie for ring, it probably means relatively narrow in width, not diameter. Then we have pligndopyros and kritio, became filled with unmixed fire. The way it's scanned reminds us of Homer. Think of phrases like, his dark heart became filled with strength. This suggests the rings weren't pre-existing. They formed by becoming filled with fire and night. The aorist tense pligando really emphasizes this act of creation. Next, metadophlogos petaisa, in which moved a proportion of flame. The isopha here is the amount of fire mixed into the wider night-dominated rings. It contrasts directly with the unmixed fire of the narrower rings. And notice the shift in tense from pligando to betate. This isn't just about how the rings came to be. It implies they're still active parts of the universe. The fire within them is constantly moving. This tells us Parmenides wasn't just talking about origins, he was describing an ongoing cosmic process. So putting it all together, what does Fragment 12 paint? We've got these narrower rings of pure fire, and wider rings where fire is mixed with night. Aetius' summary adds rings of pure night too. Now could these rings correspond to zones on a celestial sphere? It seems likely. Imagine the narrow fire rings as the hot equatorial regions, the mixed rings as the temperate zones north and south of the tropics, and the pure night rings as the cold polar regions. This model feels incredibly vivid, almost like Parmenides is describing a physical globe, much like Plato does for the world's soul. It even makes you wonder if he was familiar with, or inspired early attempts at celestial globes, sometimes credited to Anaximander. If this interpretation holds, it strongly supports the idea that Parmenides originated the concept of dividing the heavens into zones, a theory later attributed to Pythagoras, but likely referring to Parmenides himself. Now, where exactly does this goddess fit in this cosmic structure? Line 3 is crucial. Mesoteuton between these. But what are these? Simplicius interprets it broadly as in the middle of everything, placing her at the universe's center. But hold on, Parmenides, like Plato, believed the earth was central. So, unless Simplicius means she's inside the earth, which feels odd, this doesn't quite work. Aetius tries a different angle, interpreting Mesuo as central, meaning she's one of the mixed rings. Again, this feels wrong, and it clashes with Theophrastus' claim that fire is the moving cause. Some scholars, like Zeller and Diels, suggested she's actually at the very center of the earth itself, part of that Pythagorean idea of fire within the earth. Plausible, maybe, but does the text support it? Teuton could refer to the rings, not necessarily the whole system or the earth. Plus, the tradition consistently describes the earth as a solid Stephani, a ring, not a place where a goddess resides. And it breaks the connection with the prologue's imagery. So, where does that leave us? Let's revisit Cicero's version. He says Parmenides created a circle of light, a Stephani, that confines the heat and encircles the heaven, calling it God. This clicks perfectly with Aetius' description of the aether, the ether, as the highest encircling everything, and standing above the fiery heaven. Bingo! It seems the goddess is the aether. This interpretation elegantly solves many problems. It fits the ring zonal model. It makes sense of hen. Mesoteuton, if teuton refers to the mixed rings, and meso means between, in the sense of lying between the tropics in the ecliptic plane. The ether, as the outermost layer, would naturally enclose and drive the inner celestial spheres. This also explains why Theophrastus said fire was the originative cause. The ether, while fiery, had a beginning when it was devised. It subtly supports Simplicius's point that the goddess isn't fire itself, but a formation of it. It confirms Aetius' reference to Teuton but corrects his paraphrase of Meswu. It looks like the best fit. If the goddess is the female ether, this connects nicely to Parmenides' own biological ideas. Females contain more heat, aligning with the male principle. This actually goes against Aristotle's account of Pythagorean views, where light and male were grouped together. Instead, it resonates with other traditions attributed to Pythagoras, like the world being enclosed by necessity, and theologians' descriptions of necessity driving the cosmos. If necessity is the driving force, and the goddess the ether is doing the driving, then necessity and the goddess are essentially two names for the same thing. This explains that line in Fragment 9, the heaven is led and chained by necessity. It's the surrounding ether, the goddess, imparting its motion. Later thinkers picked up on this. Aristotle, discussing the inclined circle, essentially gave a non-mythological version of the goddess's role. Adrastus linked solstices and equinoxes to change in generation, echoing the same themes. The idea of a governing cosmic principle, whether named necessity or goddess, persisted. What else does the goddess do? Fragment 12, line 3, says she conducts souls back and forth between the visible and invisible realms. Simplicius tells us this comes from Parmenides' belief section, acknowledging the text was obscure. This idea strongly echoes Numenius, who reported Parmenides talking about two gateways in the heavens, one for souls descending to birth and one for ascending to the gods. While Numenius often points to the prologue's gateway, Simplicius suggests this dual gateway concept mainly belongs to the beliefs. It definitely feels like it's in the same ballpark as Plato's openings in the myth of Ur. Where are these gates? Numenius, citing theologians, puts them in Capricorn and Cancer, linking it to a cave-like universe image. But Parmenides, in the prologue, describes a gate at the boundary leading to the ether. There's no clear evidence in the belief section for pinpointing these gates either. It remains a tantalizing mystery. Moving on to Fragment 13, Plato has Socrates quote Parmenides, "First of all the gods she devised love." Who is she? Our goddess again. The verb mitisato, devised, paints her as a rational creative power, not just a parent. Think Heraclitus, steersman, or Anaximander's steersman for the infinite, similar ideas about a guiding intelligence. Philodemus adds she's inanimate, pure intelligence, fitting with her prophetic role and the doxographic title Pronia, Providence. She governs by initiating generation, using forces she created, with Eros love taking the lead. Cicero mentions other forces too: war, discord, desire, things Heraclitus would recognize. Plutarch calls Eros the eldest work of Aphrodite, possibly hinting at an alternative name for Parmenides' goddess. This fragment really highlights her role as the originator of the forces driving becoming. Let's switch gears to the moon. What did Parmenides think? The doxographers say he saw the moon formed from a cold, dense mixture, like a galaxy, and made of air and fire. Same size as the sun, illuminated by it, appearing earthy because of its dark component. Stars, including the moon and sun, were considered divine. Now, look at fragments 14 and 15. Parmenides calls the moon round, wandering around the earth, tracing its monthly path through the zodiac. Crucially, he describes its light as allotrion phos, alien light. This strongly implies it's borrowed from the sun. Some scholars doubted this, thinking Anaxagoras discovered it, but Parmenides' own words seem clear. He even uses the phrase nyctiphaies, darkly bright, suggesting it shines like night, confirming it's a solid body reflecting light. He probably used the observation that the moon always faces the sun to explain its phases, needing a spherical moon for that. Did he think it was a sphere like Earth? Maybe not. Empedocles thought it was lens-shaped, but the borrowed light idea is solid. Fragment 16 touches on the Earth's roots. The idea of rooted Earth goes way back to Hesiod and Xenophanes. But Parmenides, according to Theophrastus, saw the Earth as a sphere floating centrally in the cosmos. So, what does it mean for it to be rooted in water? It can't mean infinitely deep, like Xenophanes. It likely refers to underground rivers or seas, like those imagined by Plato. Or maybe it means the land masses within the central sphere are its roots. Perhaps Parmenides was even explaining earthquakes as caused by water moving beneath the surface, a theory also linked to Thales, Democritus, and the Stoics. And just like with nyctiphaies, this fragment shows Parmenides creatively using epic language to express his cosmological ideas. Now for something completely different: perception. Fragment 17, cited by Aristotle and Theophrastus, tackles this head-on. The core idea is that perceiving is understanding, and both involve a physical change. Theophrastus summarizes Parmenides' take: your ability to know or think depends on whether you're warm or cold-blooded, metaphorically speaking. Warm-derived understanding is better, though it needs a touch of cold. A corpse lacking fire perceives cold and silence, not light or sound. Parmenides even seems to say everything that exists has some awareness. Let's look closely at the fragment. Ekastot means at each moment, suggesting mind is tied to your physical state. Kresin, temper or mixture, is what mind has. Meleon polyplankton, of the vagrant body, literally means body that wanders or changes, reflecting how our environment affects us, echoing Homer and Archilochus on how fortune shapes the mind. The perfect tense parestiken is present, implies presence based on past state, like Homer uses for fate or death. It's a rich, dynamic picture of mind. Continuing with fragment 17, the second sentence uses koitos kushber, the same as a standard identifying phrase. It equates mind nous with the understanding derived from the body's nature meleon physis. Then it states togar pleon nesti noema, the preponderant is the thought conceived. This directly links an individual's thoughts noema to the dominant element in their physical makeup to pleon. So the argument flows: dominant element equals thought, therefore mind equals understanding from physique. Therefore mind is present according to physique at any given moment. This clearly applies to sensible knowledge, not Parmenides' metaphysical being. It connects to his earlier use of nous in the phenomenal world. It might even relate to Theophrastus's idea that mind nonin is soul psychein, which is fiery pyrothi, and death is the loss of fire, hence loss of mind. This nous, while rooted in the physical, still feels like a powerful, almost transcendent force, like the goddess, but still part of the phenomenal realm. Alright, let's dive into the nitty-gritty of generation with fragments 18 and 19. Fragment 18, via Galen, suggests Parmenides thought the right side of the womb produced males, the left produced females. If the seed landed on the wrong side, you got abnormalities. This contrasts with Anaxagoras, who thought only the father contributed seed. Parmenides, however, agreed with Alcmaeon that both parents contribute. Fragment 19 backs this up. Both parents provide seed from their blood. Each seed has a potency dynamis. Normally, these potencies blend harmoniously to create a well-formed being. If they clash, you get double seed, a kind of curse. Soranus cited this to illustrate inborn tendencies passed through seed. This confirms dual contribution and seed from blood. The resulting potency works in the embryo's veins to shape it. Lines 4 to 6 even use a Homeric allusion, likely referencing Achilles and Patroclus, to illustrate conflict leading to bad outcomes. It's a detailed, if somewhat grim, account of how inheritance and identity might work. Finally, Fragment 20, possibly the poem's conclusion, brings us back to the distinction between the sensible world and being. These things, Parmenides says, originated and received sustenance. He uses that Pindaric phrase now in later times. The key is katadoxan, according to belief. Sensible things are real enough for us now, but they will end. They exist because we believe them and name them, like coins needing their mark to be recognized. This beautifully reinforces the core Parmenidean message. The world of appearances, dependent on our perception and naming, is fleeting and ultimately illusory compared to the eternal, unchanging reality of being. And that wraps up our deep dive into these fragments.